Hi everyone. Today I'm standing in front of the building where Vladimir Putin grew up in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. Exactly 25 years ago, on March 26, 2000, Putin was elected as president of Russia. Few could imagine how KGB agent would completely transform this country, or how techniques he perfected would later threaten democracies all over the world. What makes Putin's rise so disturbing isn't what Russia became, but how smoothly the transformation happened. A quarter century ago, he spoke about joining NATO, embraced Western values, and promised never to change constitution to extend his powers. Today, Russians go to prison for simply calling his war in Ukraine a war. Today, so many Americans compare Putin to Trump, but having grown up in Russia, I can tell you that while there are concerning parallels, the situations aren't identical. There are universal warning signs in how democracies erode from within that are worth understanding. Today, I want to walk you through not only how Putin's rise happened, but why it matters to every democracy that values its freedom. This is Natasha, and welcome to my Russia. Putin's origin story is well known. Born to a working-class family in post-war Leningrad, living in a communal apartment where multiple families shared facilities. His father was a factory worker who had served in the war, his mother a cleaning woman. What's particularly significant about Putin's KGB background isn't just the intelligence-specific training, but the skills it cultivated. Information manipulation, psychological operations, and the identification of leverage points to influence behavior. These skills will become central in his governance approach later. Putin's rise through ranks wasn't marked through ideological or revolutionary vision. Rather, his ascent reflected professional competence within existing power structures. When the Soviet Union collapsed, he quickly adapted, finding his place in the new order within the team of Anatoly Sobchak in St. Petersburg. This pragmatic adaptability will become crucial in his path to presidency. It allowed himself to present as whatever Russia seems to need at the moment. A stabilizing force after chaos, a modernizer, a defender of Russian interests, adjusting his persona to match the circumstances. Unlike many Soviet loyalists who struggled with the collapse of communism, Putin's primary loyalty seemed to be to the power itself than to any specific ideology. This flexibility explains the seeming contradiction in his early presidential rhetoric versus his actions. When Putin came to power in 2000, his rhetoric was strikingly different from the Putin that we know today.
Россия – это часть европейской культуры. И я не представляю себе своей собственной страны в отрыве от Европы и от так называемого, как мы часто говорим, цивилизованного мира. С трудом представляю себе и НАТО в качестве врага.
And even suggesting Russia might join NATO. His first economic reforms appeared genuinely liberal, introducing a flat income tax, reducing regulations, and balancing the budget. Western leaders were charmed.
I'll answer the question. I looked the man in the eye. I found it to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country. And I appreciated so very much the frank dialogue.
While these market-friendly policies were implemented publicly, Putin was building something that he will call vertical of power later, systematically placing loyalists in key positions throughout governmental ministries, regional leadership, and state enterprises. This ensured that regardless of how liberal these policies appeared, the implementation remained firmly under his control. The early takeover of independent TV, starting from NTV in 2001, showed true priorities of Putin. Information control came first, while economic liberalization continued.
New security guards were placed around Russia's last independent national TV station. And as arguments broke out in the corridors inside, NTV's new owners took control.
Я еще раз обращаюсь к вам. Только если вы не прекратите поддерживать нас, мы сможем продолжать делать ту работу, за которую вы нас любите. Оставайтесь с нами.
Western leaders likely understood what was going on, but chose engagement with Russia anyway. There were significant strategic interests at play: access to Russian energy resources, cooperation on counterterrorism after 9/11, and potential market for Western goods. Many genuinely hoped economic engagement would gradually lead to true liberalization, despite warning from Russian critics that democratic institutions were gradually, systematically undermined. To understand why Russians accepted Putin's authoritarian growing, we must grasp both economic trauma of the 90s and the national humiliation Boris Yeltsin came to represent. After standing boldly on a tank to face down a coup attempt in 1991, Yeltsin quickly devolved into international embarrassment. For Russians, Yeltsin became the face of their country's decline. A stumbling, slurring alcoholic who was often too drunk to function during important diplomatic meetings. From failing to leave his plane to meet the Irish Prime Minister because he was intoxicated, to allegedly being found in a Washington, D.C. street in his underwear trying to hail a taxi for pizza. Each incident deepened Russia's national humiliation. By 1991, Russia defaulted on its debt and ruble collapsed. Many middle-class Russians who had enthusiastically embraced democratic changes now associated democracy with poverty, chaos, and national humiliation. The oligarchs who acquired insane amount of wealth through some weird schemes of privatization were seen as thieves who have stolen Russian resources while the rest of the population was in poverty. Then, in a surprise move on the New Year's Eve 1999, Yeltsin resigned and appointed Putin.
В соответствии с Конституцией, уходя в отставку, я подписал указ о возложении обязанностей президента России на председателя правительства Владимира Владимировича Путина. Я хочу попросить у вас прощения.
Сегодня на меня возложена обязанность главы государства. Любые попытки выйти за рамки российских законов, за рамки Конституции России, будут решительно пресекаться. Свобода слова, свобода совести, свобода средств массовой информации, права собственности. Эти основополагающие элементы цивилизованного общества будут надежно защищены государством.
Putin presented the exact opposite image of Yeltsin: young, sober, disciplined, and strong. Where Yeltsin rumbled incoherently, Putin spoke with clarity and purpose. Where Yeltsin appeared weak and sometimes clownish, Putin projected strength and dignity.
Мы будем преследовать террористов везде. В аэропорту, значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт окончательно.
Almost Almost immediately after Putin took power, the economy began to recover. Global oil prices rose dramatically, filling Russian coffers. Simultaneously, the painful Russian economic reforms of the 90s began to bear fruit. Average wages tripled from 2000 to 2008. A new middle class emerged. Russians could suddenly afford foreign vacations, new cars, and new foreign appliances. For many, especially older Russians who remembered Soviet stability, the newfound prosperity more than compensated for the gradual loss of political freedoms. The unspoken social contrast became clear. Let Putin handle politics, and we will take care of economy and national pride. The crucial moment in Putin's transformation happened in 2011-2012. After serving 2 terms, Putin became prime minister while installing his loyal friend Dmitry Medvedev as president, technically following the constitution term limits while maintaining significant influence. The 2011 parliamentary elections were marred by widespread fraud, ballot stuffing captured on video, impossible voting percentages in some regions, and statistical anomalies that experts said can only be explained by manipulation. When Putin announced his return to presidency through what many saw as prearranged swap with Medvedev, accumulated frustrations that erupted into the largest protests since Soviet times.
Tens of thousands came out on the streets to tell Prime Minister Vladimir Putin they'd had enough.
More than 1,000 people were protesting once more against what they say was a fixed election and against the Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Russia without Putin has become their slogan.
This represented a Putin's fork in the road, a moment faced by many evolving autocracies. One path leads towards developing stronger democratic institutions, competitive elections, independent judiciary, free media. The other path rolls back liberalization, crushes civil society, and preserves the status quo at all costs. That path maintains power. And Putin chose power. He blamed Hillary Clinton and the US State Department for giving this signal to protesters. That old KGB worldview re-emerged. Opposition wasn't legitimate. It was a foreign subversion.
Но когда деньги из-за границы вкладываются в политическую деятельность внутри страны, это должно нас заставить задуматься.
In the months following the protests, Putin's government passed dozens of restrictive laws. NGOs receiving foreign fundings became foreign agents. Protest organizers faced long prison terms. A critical factor enabling this crackdown was that the economic situation was relatively stable. Oil prices were high, and most of people, especially outside of large cities, saw the protesters as an elite concern disconnected from their daily lives. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 was the point of no return. Rather than a long-term planned imperial strategy, it was an opportunistic move that solved Putin's legitimacy problem overnight. The annexation accomplished 2 critical objectives. First, it delivered a resounding and almost casualty-free victory, a cinematic triumph without significant bloodshed. For any government, such a foreign policy success boosts legitimacy and support. The stolen vote of 2011 suddenly seemed irrelevant against the backdrop of Crimea is ours again.
После тяжелого, длительного, изнурительного плавания Крым и Севастополь возвращаются в родную гавань.
Second, Putin used Crimea and Donbass to show that protest movements wouldn't succeed. The Ukrainian Maidan revolution had just shown citizens and neighboring countries successfully overthrowing their corrupt government through peaceful protest, a dangerous example as Putin struggled with his own protest movement. By crushing Ukraine's democratic aspirations with invasion, Putin sent a clear message to Russians. Challenges to power lead only to chaos and war. The Crimea annexation didn't just boost Putin's popularity, it fundamentally reoriented Russian society around permanent confrontation with the West. State media shifted from portraying Russia as a unique civilization to depicting it as a fortress under siege, making dissent equivalent to treason during wartime. Despite Western sanctions and economic difficulties, Putin's approval rating soared to record highs. For many Russians, Crimea represented a symbolic victory over the post-Cold War order that humiliated Russia. The economic cost seemed worth it for this renewed sense of national pride. What's remarkable here is that the system adapted to economic pressure. When oil prices fell and Western sanctions hit in 2014, the Putin regime adjusted. It built up massive financial reserves, reduced dependency on import, and cultivated new economic relationships with India and China. While living standards have declined or were stagnating for the most of Russians, the system has proven to be more resilient than many Western experts predicted. Putin has built a system where all power and wealth flow through him. The security services, his old colleagues, have unprecedented influence. State propaganda portrays him as Russia's indispensable protector against the West. This isn't just autocracy through repression. It's a comprehensive system combining control, nationalist ideology, and information manipulation. In this reality, Russia is defending itself from the Western aggression, from the Ukrainian Nazis, and preserving traditional values against decadent Western culture. And those who disagree are portrayed as traitors or foreign agents. So now some of you might think, well, if Putin brought stability and better living standards, maybe strong leadership is better than chaotic democracy. But here is actually what autocracy cost a society. First, autocracies create long-term instability. Without peaceful ways to transfer power or fix failing policies, problems grow until they explode. After 25 years of Putin, Russia has no succession plan and is trapped in a costly war that killed thousands of people, now already hundreds of thousands of Russians. The short-term stability comes at the cost of much bigger problems down the road. Second, autocracies kill innovation and economic growth. Russia remains dependent on oil and gas instead of developing a modern economy. Why? Because innovation needs free thinking and fair competition. When people are afraid to speak, when connections matter more than talent, and when courts serve powerful instead of justice, then economy stagnates for everyone except those on top. Third, autocracies corrupt everyday life. Even if you don't take care about politics, autocracy eventually affects you personally. Hospitals lack equipment because officials steal. Roads stay broken because contracts go to relatives and friends instead of qualified companies. Your child's education becomes propaganda instead of preparation for their future. And finally, autocracies strip away human dignity. Having a say in your community, speaking without fear, and believing that you can improve your future aren't luxuries. They are essential to a meaningful life. Economic growth without personal freedom is an empty achievement. The tragedy of Russia isn't just lost democratic institutions. It's lost human potential. Millions of talented Russians have left. Countless innovations and contributions to the society will not happen because the environment that would nurture them doesn't exist. That's why defending democracy isn't about abstract principles. It's about creating societies where people can reach their full potential, where problems can get fixed before they become disastrous, where corruption is fought rather than built into the system, and where your dignity doesn't depend on staying silent. So here's my message to Americans who compare Trump and Putin. Here's what I think experiencing Putin's Russia firsthand. First, institutions matter more than personalities. Russian democratic institutions in the 90s were extremely young, fragile, and in many ways merely facades, covering Soviet-era structures. America's institutions are strong and more established with centuries of traditions behind them. However, even the strongest institutions require active defense and maintenance. Second, watch for incremental changes that normalize violations of democratic norms. Russia didn't transform from quasi-democracy to autocracy overnight. Each restriction of freedom was justified by security reasons and traditional values. I know you can hear something similar here. Small violations that go unchallenged pave the way for larger ones. Third, be aware of leaders who use democratic language while undermining democratic substance. Putin still holds elections, maintains a parliament, and speaks of Russia as a democracy, all while systematically emptying these institutions of genuine power. The facade often remains long after the substance has been hollowed out. Fourth, economic prosperity doesn't guarantee democratic survival. Many Russians accepted the loss of political freedom in exchange for stability and improved living standards after chaotic 90s. When basic needs feel uncertain, abstract rights might seem like luxuries. Fifth, economic inequality creates vulnerability to authoritarian appeals. When Russians saw oligarchs getting obscenely rich while ordinary people struggled during the 90s democratic period, it created lasting skepticism about whether democracy truly served their interests. Extreme wealth disparities make it easier for populist leaders to position themselves as champions against corrupt elites, even when building systems that primarily benefiting elites loyal to them. And finally, be wary of leaders without core convictions beyond preserving power. Putin wasn't driven by imperial ambition from the start. He was driven by the desire to remain in power. The specific ideology he embraced was secondary and adaptable to whatever served that primary goal. 25 years after Putin was elected president, Russia stands as a cautionary tale. The path from flawed democracy to autocracy wasn't inevitable. It was paved with specific choices, missed opportunities, and the exploitation of genuine problems to justify centralized power. Americans comparing their own political dynamics to Russia should recognize the crucial differences in institutions, history, and political culture. But they should also remain vigilant about the universal techniques autocrats use to undermine democratic systems from within. The most effective defense against democratic erosion isn't just formal institutions, it's civil society. Supporting independent journalism, participating in government, and refusing to normalize small violations of democratic norms. Democracy isn't maintained by grand gestures, but through thousands of daily choices to uphold its principles. If you find this video interesting, let me know in comments. I would like to hear your thoughts or parallels on Russian and American politics. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video.
У меня не было соблазна остаться на третий срок. Никогда. С первого дня работы в качестве президента Российской Федерации я для себя сразу решил, что я не буду нарушать действующую Конституцию. Говорят, что самая большая зависимость от власти. Я этого никогда не чувствовал. Я вообще никогда не был зависимым человеком от чего бы то ни было.